Thank you very much, sir.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's really great to be here, and this is the first time I've had the great honour and pleasure of listening to Ian. I've heard a lot about him, mostly from people who disagree with him. So it was fortunate and interesting to be able to hear Ian at first hand. I was actually born in Carlton in Melbourne, and at the age of 8 found myself on a ship going to the UK to be educated at a time when most of the rest of the world was coming in the opposite direction, and we were importing labour. And since the age of 8, I've wandered around the world all the time. And as Kerry said, most of my time is spent overseas, advising governments and multinational corporations about the issues facing us today. Last week I was in Seville, in Spain, which was wonderful. It was really warm, which was lovely. And I was working with the EU, the commissioners of the EU, trying to advise them about the need for them to change their minds about certain things or see the decline of Europe continue, as there is an inexorable shift of moral authority and also economic development to the global south and Asia. If you look at 1,500 to 2,000 years, I won't go back as far as Ian did, but at least for the 2,000 past years, that's merely a rebalancing of what used to be the case. The influence of Europe and the US and the UK really has been a recent phenomenon in terms of the world system. So anyway, I was in Seville, and then I was called to try and rescue, I guess, a multinational corporation, which you would know well if I told you the name, in telecommunications, which is in serious trouble. It's just about to sack, or has sacked, about 7,000 people globally. And it's entered into an arrangement with another company in the US which is going to drag it down even further, and it doesn't realize it. It's being very, very naive. And I did go up to talk to the chairman and then said, I can't stay longer. They wanted me to stay the entire week and work into this week. And I said, I really can't stay here. I have to go and speak at a conference in Broken Hill. And the chairman of this company looked at me as though I was mad and said, where? I said, Broken Hill. And he said, I've never heard of it. Surely we're taking out about 3 million euros a month from the contract with this company. And I'm the lead on it. And he said, surely you don't want to lose your contract with us. Why do you have to go to this conference in, what was it again? I said, Broken Hill. And I said, the reason is I'm a very proud Australian. I was born in Australia. I love Australia. I see Australia much more clearly living overseas than a lot of people living here. And for me, to go to an iconic town such as Broken Hill and to work with and share some ideas with an iconic industry such as the resources and mining and energy industry in Australia is, to me, a mission. I have to be there. He said, okay, go. We've still got the contract. So it's a great pleasure to be here. It's a very long-winded way of saying it's a great pleasure to be here. And I want to share with you a few ideas which I think are important. Always remembering that I'm essentially a strategist, and all strategy is only temporary. The best strategy is only, ever, temporary. And the best strategy is always very specific to you, to a particular company, to a particular industry. And so please bear in mind, for at least 30 minutes, I'm going to be quite general in what I'm saying. I'm going to be general too for a reason, because it's important for you to understand and interpret intelligently what is going on in the world today. The context for strategy is vitally important. And the impression I get, and it's been borne out by some of the things Ian was saying about the government today, is that there are a lot of people in Australia, and certainly a lot of them in politics, who really have no conception about what is actually going on in the world today. And so I want to try and correct that impression for you, at least. Now, there's something you need to bear in mind. Oh, this print. Yes, this print I'd forgotten. This is an alchemical print. And it's a guy, an alchemist, sticking his head through the reality of the world he's living in to see a different reality. Has everyone here seen the Matrix trilogy of movies? Yeah? Anyone not? Stick your hand up if you haven't. Oh dear. The Matrix. There were 3 of them. Brilliant movies. But basically it was about people who had not realized there was another reality going on around them, a kind of simultaneous universe, if you like. But the people who understood the reality had swallowed a red pill. All the others had swallowed a blue pill. The people with the red pill, there was no going back. They saw the evil that surrounded them. They saw the reality of what was actually happening, and it was as though the people who had swallowed the blue pill were all asleep. They weren't awake to that reality. This goes back to the 14th century, and it's even then a clue that sometimes we don't understand what is going on all around us. But I wanted to put this quote up as well, because as a futurist, I dance with the future. I have to tell you a story about my mother. My mother was Australian, my father was English. He was in the British Army. But later on, and another reason I enjoy being here is because he was a miner in Kent, in England, in some of the coal mines in Kent. And they have their own story. But as a futurist, I dance with the future. I wasn't always a futurist. I started off in medicine, and then because I was working in pediatric oncology, emotionally I couldn't hack it, and I gave it away and went back to my first love, which was writing music. Quite a difference. Then I went into academia, then I fell into management. I did a lot of different things. But I must tell you a story about my mother. My mother was born on Norfolk Island and didn't have much schooling. I think she left school at the age of 11 and went into service as a maid with a Lady Robinson and went to England. And she was very much a proper person. She was very religious. She went to church every Sunday morning. She prayed. I never heard a swear word cross her lips at all, until the day I told her that some people had called me a futurist, and I was interested in different elements of the future. And the thing that's always stuck in my mind, and please, I hope no one will be offended by this, true story, it's always stuck in my mind that the words from my mother were, "Ricky, I've always understood what you've been doing, but tell me, what the fuck is a futurist?" First time I'd ever heard her swear. And in fact, the other bit of advice that I remember from my mother, she said, "Remember always, whatever you do, there will always be a fuckwit." So she was very Australian. This is important as a context for explaining the ideas I want to share with you. In May 2005, I was invited to New York to lunch in a restaurant called I think it's called Blue Hill or Blue Room, but it's a very well-known, very good restaurant. And it was a luncheon for bankers in the US. I'd been asked to speak on the topic of the global, or the future of the global economy. And the invitation had come from one Alan Greenspan, and so you can't turn down those kinds of invitations. And so I went, and there were about 20 very eminent US bankers in the room. And we had prepared, my company, the Haynes Group, had prepared a map of where we thought the pressures were on that industry in the US that would impact other economies around the world sooner or later. And we didn't put a date on it, but we had mapped out these pressure points, and we'd identified things like the subprime mortgage industry, for example, and we'd identified financial instruments like credit default swaps, which nobody understood, and we'd identified the fact that in the US there was hardly a universal healthcare system to speak of. It was totally inadequate. And what we did was we pulled these dots together and said, look, here is what you are creating at the moment. This system that you're driving is being driven increasingly by the quest for profits, and underlying that is competition and greed as values, and this is what is going to happen. And I said, May 2005, sooner or later, this is going to lead to a huge crisis in the global financial industry. They couldn't hear the music. And there was a guy who came up to Alan Greenspan as Alan was saying goodbye to me after lunch. And he said, and I quote precisely, "Alan, I hope you will not pay Richard Hames a cent, including travel expenses, because I have never heard such a load of crap in all my life." And all of those 20 bankers, most of whom now are in the Obama administration running the global economy, thought this was a load of Australian bullshit. Some of you today will look at these slides and listen to what I'm saying, and the great temptation will be to write it off. Please try not to do that. Please try and keep open minds, because the more you will think about it, the more you can ignore what is reported in The Age and The Australian or the Financial Review, and look more widely at what is actually happening around us, and interpret what you need to do individually and as companies and as a country in that context. With wider intelligence, the better off you will be positioned for a future that can be an incredible future. If you listen to the conventional wisdom, a lot of which Ian has already talked about, if you listen to that and take it seriously, you will hear music that is deafening, and you will dance to a different tune. And that tune will lead further into chaos, in my belief. So let's go with a few ideas and see what you think. First of all, I want to dwell for a few minutes, and there'll be time for questions, by the way. I want to dwell for a few minutes on the sweep of history over the past 600 to 800 years at least. And I want to talk about globalization, because globalization is often thought to be a recent phenomenon. It is not. Globalization has been happening for hundreds of years. And it started off in around the 15th century, where nations were looking for new lands to occupy. And fleets of explorers were sent out in their ships to find these new lands. And they discovered new lands where they could actually use those resources for their own ends. And then the Great Revolution, of course, occurred when they invented this clicker which doesn't work. It does. That is the Industrial Revolution, where we began to see corporations exploring for new markets for their goods and for cheaper labor. More recently, with the advent of new technologies such as the internet, the World Wide Web, for example, we've seen that power taken over by individuals. Now it's very easy to start a company anywhere in the world with other people's money almost instantly. And nowadays, the speed of change and the speed to market of new ventures is absolutely critical. When I heard Ian talk about the time it takes to explore, to create licenses, and to actually commercialize an idea in this industry, I was appalled because, it didn't occur to me before, though I've worked in industries like the aeronautical industry, for example, the time it takes you is too long. So the question is, how can you speed up that process? Because today, speed is of the essence. You cannot take that long because the opportunity will pass. Windows open and close again very, very quickly in today's environment. And in terms of globalization, the fourth phase, which we've entered into already, which is going to be absolutely critical to understand, and very few people don't, is also the rise of the commons yet again. The conversations that matter that are going on in the corridors of power, in the UN, in the World Economic Forum, in various governments around the world, are all talking about a new kind of economy where individual wealth is balanced better with the wealth of the commons, the wealth we all share, the clean air, clean water, silence, the internet. And there are economists, such as Jamie Galbraith, for example, James Quilligan at the UN, and Pettifor in the UK, Dave Martin of MCAM, all around the world saying, what does this mean? What will this mean to create an economy that is actually different and that is based on different values and that creates a different kind of value and value exchange so that we can avoid the kind of thing that happened with the global financial crisis? And the first thing we will see coming down the track is the reformation of the banking system. And that is going to hit us hard. That's the first indication, and it's happening now, that things are changing in the global economy. The next thing we will see, of course, because a lot of us work in developing economies, is the power of those economies to change the dynamics of the global economy. No longer will we be driven by the kind of ventures and follies that have occurred for the past 100 to 200 years in the US and in Europe. So this is an interesting idea because it means that, if you like, history is speeding up. This exponential speeding up is interesting, and the power of individuals in community to change things is important. The community in this room, the community of this industry, has the power to change things. If you adopt a different meme, a different story, you can change the current politics. But if you panic, or if you try to fight the energy that's coming out of Canberra at the moment in ignorance, then that leads nowhere at all. You need intelligent strategy to underpin a new story for the future of the mining and resources and energy industry in Australia, and that I have no doubt. What have we created over the past few hundred years? We've created a society, let's face it, in Australia, which is extraordinarily affluent. We live incredibly affluent lives. We've been prosperous beyond our wildest dreams. And at the same time, we've created a huge divide between those that have all of that and those that have not. And that divide is getting wider all the time. If you listen to the people who say globalization is good for all of us because it's lifting people out of poverty, you are being seduced by lies. The reality is that that gap is getting wider. And that's giving rise to things like terrorism in extreme cases, as we've seen. It's giving rise to a situation where we're purchasing more of everything, Consumerism is growing. We don't need just one car, please, but I'll have 2 cars, or I need another one for my eldest son, so build a 3-car garage, please. We need more, and we're throwing more stuff away. As if, Kerry mentioned waste. We're throwing literally more stuff away. I know how culpable I am. I moved to Bangkok about 6-7 years ago, and just before I moved, I bought some shirts in Melbourne. I was living in Melbourne CBD. I still have those shirts in my wardrobe, 6 or 7. They're unpacked, and I know that they are now out of style. So I'm not going to wear them. I'm 66, but I still feel I'm a bit, hip. I like to be in style. So I'll throw them away. It's waste. Actually, I won't. I'll give them to members of my family, but it's waste. We've created something, in spite of what Ian was saying. I disagree with Ian entirely. Listening to scientists around the world, and the scientists I respect, I believe, I'm not sure about the extent to which this is human-induced, but I do know for certain that there is no doubt that the situation that we're moving into and in which we're going to have to live is going to become more and more difficult in terms of climate. To ignore that is to ignore it at your peril. All of these things, the office environment here I rather like, because I see that as totally an unliberated way of working. Just a few images. Basically what I'm saying here is however you look at that, it's unsustainable. It is unsustainable. It's not viable. We have to move on. We have to create a different kind of world to live in. 10 years ago, almost to the day, I was working with BP, with Lord John Browne, and I was working on different kinds of strategy. I was responsible for the whole-of-country strategy in Japan. At the time, I was working with the HR community right across BP world. I was working in South Africa, and I was also mentoring a very few senior people in that company. And it was one of the most admired companies in the world. BP was extraordinary. And when they changed the branding, you'll recall the change of the brand from BP to Beyond Petroleum. You could ask each of the roughly 117,000 people in BP what that meant to them personally in the work they did, and you'd get immediately an answer that was aligned right across the world. The workforce in BP was extraordinary, and their focus on health and safety, too, was extraordinary. What on earth went wrong? What went wrong? That we now have a BP that is scorned. It's considered to be the very worst of corporate entities. What happened in the space of that time? Can we really believe that all of a sudden, simply because there was a change in CEO, that standards slipped? Can we really believe all that we read in the media about what happened in the Gulf or a Texas City explosion? Can we really believe what the senior managers then started saying about their company? What's the truth? What is the truth? A lot of the time today, we see in the media industry and business blamed for everything. I remember quite a few years ago, I was working with Michael Carmody, who at the time was Commissioner of Taxation. And I was working with him and his team. This was just before business tax reform hit. We jokingly said, Michael, everyone's blaming you for everything. And he said, well, you know, I'm used to that. And if the trains don't run on time, they blame the Commissioner of Taxation. But now, these days, we seem to blame companies and business and industries. Your industry is getting the blame for certain things, including climate change, which is ridiculous. You cannot accept that. You have to find, again, an intelligent strategy that allows you to say, here is what we were in the past, but this is what we are becoming in the future. And yes, of course this is critical for Australia's future. Of course this industry is important. You employ roughly I guess about 137,000 people. You are the dominant industry in Australia today. If you don't adapt, then you won't be. But if you do adapt, and if you adapt intelligently, and if you recognize the expertise and the skills and the knowledge you have, and see how that is needed in the rest of the world, especially in the developing nations, you will then carve out a niche for yourself, as Ian says. That is the future of Australia as well. But that needs to be done intelligently. And you know from martial arts that you use the energy of your opponent to assist you. You don't actually clash and try and force that enemy back, which is what you're doing or what your industry representatives are doing at the moment. It will not work. It won't work because you're working against ignorance and blindness. So what is the truth? The truth is, ladies and gentlemen, that globally speaking, in terms of the world system, there are actually 4 crises that we are in to some extent or another. And they affect us as individuals, and they affect us as companies, and these crises affect us as a species. And if we look at these from the top right, we begin to realize that the crisis of behavior occurs simply because there are so many of us now. At the end of this century, the latest calculations are that we are likely to top 10.1 billion people on the planet. This is on a planet that has finite resources. There's nowhere else. This is it. When I was born, there were under 2 billion people on the planet. In my lifetime, we've gone from 2 billion to 7 billion. We hit 7 billion, roughly speaking, in October this year. And all of us are aspiring to live the kinds of lives that the wealthiest of us live. That's what's happening. And it's led to a crisis because we are consuming too much. Every year we consume the resources of 2.5 Earth planets. We're stealing from the future. And if you're happy, if you've got children and grandchildren, if you're happy that that should be the case, that we're making our lives more and more intolerable for our children and their children, then fine, so be it. But if that worries you, then we have to pay attention to that crisis and do something about it. The second crisis, coming down to the crisis of systems, is things we hear about daily from the newspapers, from the TV, from the media. We're bombarded all the time about the rising cost of food, peak oil, the fact that water aquifers all over the world seem to be getting less, and we're polluting the environment, we're doing this, we're doing that. What we can be sure of is that change is occurring, and that change in itself is a crisis, and we need to adapt. If we come across to this side, because of those pressures, we see us beginning to blame each other more. How are you different? I'm Christian and you're Islamic. Oh, there's difference there. You are the other. Or I am wealthy, you are poor. Well, I want to preserve my wealth. Hard luck about yours. We start blaming each other. And this is because the values that have underpinned our society for at least the past 250, 300 years are based on the notion of scarcity and competition. Those people who base their lives on the spirit of abundance and collaborate and cooperate in abundance don't suffer the same pressures and don't blame each other. So the values in society are important. Sometimes we have to create the shift there as well. And if we go up to that last crisis, the crisis of consciousness, which is manifesting, again, all around the world, but particularly in the developed world, in the numbers of people needing psychiatric and psychological care, the number of young people in particular who are being alienated through what they see in the media or hear in the media, and the stories that pervade our society at the moment. We're creating a society that is working in despair and has little hope. The main story dominating us today, and here's a bit of detail for all of these, is one which is unconscionable. I actually have 9 children. 8 of those are biological, and I've inherited a 12-year-old daughter who's absolutely wonderful. And number 10 should be arriving any day now, which is why I'm a little bit on tenterhooks being in Broken Hill, because I've got to get back to Bangkok pretty quickly, because we're expecting a baby boy any day now. But with my children, and I know speaking in schools and universities, a lot of kids despair about what they hear. We need a different narrative, clearly. This is the one thing that I really dislike intensely about the work Al Gore has done. An inconvenient truth for me, yeah, there were errors in it, there were mistakes in it, and that was silly. But the thing that movie and his books have done, and I've told him about, it's created a greater awareness of some of the things that are happening to the climate, and that's it. It's left us there. It's as though the rug has been pulled out, Here it is, and we're hanging by the neck. It's left us with no hope, which is extraordinarily stupid, because human beings have initiative, and they have motivation, and they have passion, and we have technologies, and we have the capacity to change things if we have a mind to. Just to say, here's the situation, that's it, with really providing nothing, no advice except we'll change a light bulb. It's a bit stupid. So there are 4 crises facing us. The difficulty is that it's more complicated than that. We actually share a single worldview. And I don't care whether we're talking about people in Sydney, or the headquarters of BHP in Melbourne, and the kind of sophisticated mindset that we have in this country, or you go to Soweto, or a really poor community in India, Southeast Asia, Brazil, it doesn't matter where you go, we all share the same worldview. And essentially, I don't want to go into this particularly today because I haven't got the time to do it, but essentially that worldview is an acceptance that a few people, an elite, an establishment, call them what you like, rule the rest of us, who are serfs or slaves to that elite, and there are policing and government and military instruments for keeping us in our place. And there's a socialization process that makes that happen as well. And there are overwhelming narratives that help that too. The obvious one being the narrative that comes from any organized religion that says there's a higher intelligence than us. That is the single worldview we share. Whether you agree with it or not, it's there. The complicating thing is that there are different mindsets we bring, depending on which culture we've grown up in. There are 4 here. This one here is a drawing by Leonardo da Vinci, and it explains the Occidental or the Western mindset, our mindset, which is essentially we push all problems out there, and we measure them. We're so good at measuring, building and measuring. But it's only one way of interpreting the world. If you look at the one above, which is the dance of Shiva, which represents the Indic or Indian mindset. Indians think about business very, very differently from us. They're much more concerned with their inner sense of being. The reality of the world they live in for them is inside, not outside. And it's all about development internally, not external development. The one we're dealing with intrinsically today, more and more, especially us, is the Sinic mindset. The Sinic mindset, Chinese mindset, is a mindset of balance, of yin and yang, of energies in equilibrium, which is why a lot of us are confused when we first go to China, when we're negotiating a contract, for example, where the Chinese, you say to the Chinese, do you want this or that? And they say yes. It sounds as though you've had that experience. Very, very interesting, very different mindset. I won't go into this one, this is bloody. It's the Inca, the mindset of the Inca, the South American mindset. Those of you mining in South America will have probably come across this. But none of these mindsets nowadays are pure. Why? Because our technologies allow us to be interconnected all the time. We're constantly understanding and seeing how others live their lives. And so all of these are getting blurred. And there are other mindsets that are culturally important. And we saw one this morning in Welcome to Country. The Aboriginal or Indigenous mindset in Australia has a clarity about it in its relationship to the earth that is different from the Occidental worldview to which most of us have been educated. And so we're seeing these blurring of mindsets around a singular worldview. My belief is, at a meta-strategic level, my belief is that we actually need to metamorphise a different worldview. And we do that in collaboration with each other. Now, this is a difficult concept to get across to people, so you need to soak in it. You can ask a few questions in a minute. What does this mean? What is the real crisis? I've tried to draw out a few that I think, forget what I've said in terms of those four categories. What is actually happening that is the real crisis which we need to deal with? First, most important, if we're really concerned about our young people, is we need to change the story of who we are and what we're here for and how we relate to each other and how we relate to the planet. Simple. We need to create a narrative that gives hope to everyone, instead of listening to this doom and gloom which is pushed at us from every direction all the time. It's not helpful, and it suppresses innovation. It suppresses imagination, both of which we need desperately today. The second point is we are locked into a worldview that is unsustainable. Based on scarcity rather than abundance, we are fighting each other for resources. We are fighting each other for the things that matter to us, and we do not need to do that. We need to change the worldview itself. We need to create a worldview based on abundance, not scarcity, and one based on collaboration and cooperation rather than competition. And that is going to be difficult for us because we have known nothing like that over the past 200 to 300 years. It's not in our reference structures, it's not in our experience, but it's nevertheless important. Interestingly, that innovation today, if you're talking about strategic innovation, comes through collaboration, open source design, all of those kinds of things. It doesn't come from the little tiny unit you set up in your company and mandate that with the task of innovating. It doesn't come from there. Innovation comes from networks. It's a network phenomenon these days. So if you are wanting innovation in your company, same with innovation in government actually, if you want innovation to occur, you have to network nowadays globally with people, because that's where it'll happen. That's the energy for change. The real crisis is in a population of 10.1 billion people, all wanting the same stuff, all wanting more and more stuff. I don't know what you do about that. especially as the fertility rate in Africa and especially North Africa, in the Middle East, for example, is exponentially. It's growing exponentially compared with ours and other developed nations.